Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa ala. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqadatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this great blessing of the month of Ramadan. Last night we shared a couplet of poetry of Ibn Ata'illah Iskandari. And the unique part about fasting is that you have different levels of fasting. But Ibn Ata'illah, he starts from the highest level. So from a certain perspective, it's like short-circuiting the system. Let's jump right into the purpose of fasting. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyamu kama kutiba ala alladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. In order that you may achieve Allah consciousness. So if we look at the other aspects of fasting, staying away from food, drink and conjugal relations from the beginning of the day till the end of the day, that is really preparatory. So in other words, the apparent aspects of us fasting, which is staying away from food, drink and conjugal relations, that's really to prepare us for something greater. It is to prime us. You know, when you paint a wall, then painting is the last part of it actually. You must prepare the wall. So you sand, then you have filler, you fill up the cracks, and then you put a primer, and then finally you put the paint. So the staying away from food, drink and conjugal relations, it's really the primer, it's the preparation. Preparation for what? Because when we fast, we stay away from food, drink and conjugal relations, we move away from the terrestrial. Then we are primed to move towards the celestial. And what is the terrestrial here? Food, drink and conjugal relation. The celestial is gaining closeness unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, in order that you may acquire Allah consciousness and piety. So that basically brings us to these verses, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. And I'm going to be reading from Tafsir al-Tahrir wa Tanweer, which I find is very, very important. Because firstly, and you know, for Hamzi's benefit, the word la'alla is a unique word in the Arabic language, because la'alla, for example, I say اتصلت في أحمد, did you contact Ahmad? لعله بخير, perhaps he is good. In other words, there's taraji, there's a hope that he is good. So here the word la'alla, the scholars say it can be used in one of two ways. The first way is that la'alla means kay, in other words, in order to. So Allah says fasting has been prescribed upon you to deprive you of food, drink and conjugal relations? No, in order that you may acquire Allah consciousness. So that's the first meaning. The other meaning is la'alla means basically taraji, hoping. So then there's like a tashbih, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likens the intention of legislating fasting. Allah likens that idea which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does to a person who hopes from another. And that's basically in Arabic it reads like that, بِحَالِ الْمُرْتَجِي مِنْ غَيْرِ فِعْلَ مَا. You know, I wish you to go somewhere. So for example, like you're going out, I say لَعَلَّكَ تَذَهَبُ إِلَى الدُّكَانِ, perhaps you are going to the shop. So I'm actually hoping that you're going to the shop. So in this way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likens the legislation of fasting to and his intent behind there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likens it to a person who hopes from another something. And I like to dwell on the literal meaning sometimes, and it could very well be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually hoping that this month of Ramadan, of all the 12 months, that we actually make the best of this. And لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has facilitated for everything in such a manner that you are primed actually. There's no excuse really for you not to get taqwa. Maybe in other months of the year, you know, you have all of these challenges, but in this month it shouldn't be as such. So that's the first point. Then here Ibn Ashur goes into a beautiful explanation. I'm going to read the Arabic inshallah. وَالتَّقْوَى شَرْعِيَّةِ هِيَ اتِّقَاءُ الْمَعَاصِي. You know, this taqwa is sometimes very enigma for us, but we listen to it all of the time. And I think that we need to familiarize ourselves and get to grips with this word taqwa. It's a very simple word. What does it mean? It basically means to stay away from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Allah is saying لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, Allah legislates fasting for you in order that you may acquire taqwa, in order that you may do what Allah wants you to do, and you stay away from it which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to stay away from. So the next question we're going to ask ourselves now is, how does fasting facilitate for taqwa. And what is taqwa? Taqwa is fulfilling the commands of Allah and staying away from His prohibitions. How does fasting do that? So he continues and he says, وَإِنَّمَا كَانَ الصِّيَامُ مُوجِبًا لِاتِّقَاءِ الْمَعَاصِي, that fasting will necessitate that you stay away from sins, because sins are divided into two. The first type of sin, he says, is يَنْجَأُ فِيهِ التَّفَكُّرُ. So sins are divided into two. The first type of sins, to wean you off from that sin, just thinking about it will wean you off from that sin. And he gives a few examples. So the examples is khamr, wine, then gambling, sadiqah, stealing, ghasab, usurping people's so how does Allah get you to stay away from these things? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns you, if you do it, you'll get punished. And Allah promised you, if you stay away from it, and Allah will give you a reward. And that's enough. And then also very importantly, وَالْمَوْئِذَةُ بِأَحْوَالِ الْغَيْرِ. You think about people who gamble, look what's happened to them. You think about people who drink, see what happened to them. So the first type of sin, thinking about it and thinking about the consequences thereof wins you off from it. But now, so do you need fasting for that type of sin? No, you just think about it. Then the next one, however, is وَقِسْمٌ. There's a type of sin, and this is now very important for us to pay attention to, because it's a human condition, man, and we need to understand ourselves. مَنْ عَرَفَ نَفْسَهُ وَعَرَفَ رَبَّهُ. When you understand yourself, you understand your Lord and what your Lord wants from you. So there's a type of sin, يَنْشَأُ مِنْ دَوَاعٍ طَبِيعِيَّةٍ. There's a type of sin that comes about due to a natural instinct. There's a natural calling towards this particular sin. For example, كَالْأُمُورِ النَّاشِئَةِ عَنِ الْغَضَبِ, like those things that come about due to your anger. Anger is a natural thing, so you get angry. Now your anger causes you to do certain things. So there's a type of sin that is as a result of your almost like innate natural calling towards it, like those things which come about as a result of your anger. So now what happens? And just your natural desires. It is difficult to wean yourself off from it just by thinking. You tell yourself, look here, man, anger is a bad thing. The first part is madness. The latter part is regret. أَوَّلُ جُنُونٌ وَآخِرُ نَدَمٌ. You tell yourself that, you know that, you theorize it, and you tell yourself that, and you're convinced that that's exactly what anger is. But tomorrow you find yourself getting angry at the same time. So what happens now? فَجُعِلَ الصِّيَامُ وَسِيلَةً لِاتِّقَايَ. Allah has made fasting a means of staying away from there. Why? Because what does fasting do? لأنه يعدل القوى الطبيعية. That your natural instincts, which you can't rid yourself of and remove completely, what does fasting do? Fasting balances it out. It balances it out. التي هي داعية تلك المعاصي. So fasting balances that قوة الطبيعية, that natural desire that you have, which in turn is that which calls you towards these particular sins. So ghadab is probably the easy example. Ghadab is a natural thing, but what does it do? Your anger calls you to do certain things. But now when you fast, what does the fasting do? Your fasting almost like balances out that anger. You may be going to become angry, but so it doesn't come as a surprise. The Prophet ﷺ says that fasting particularly, what should you do? You know you must stay away, but he says particularly, if somebody starts to argue with you, then what should you say? I am fasting. But it's easy for you to say that because you're a bit more passive than what you normally are, because fasting, it waters down that fire of that anger, and then you find yourself in a better position, and all of those things which come upon the anger, you'll free yourself thereof. So to end of this particular part of it, they say, it's an exercise, man. Wasilatun lirtiyat, for you to practice, and like just exercise. And the beautiful Arabic, they say, an ghadid al-ingrimasi fil kadirat. You and I, man, murky water. Our lives are basically like, how does it work now, Hamza? Our lives are mushabbah, and the mushabbah bihi is a murky water. So our lives, we liken it to murky water. Now when you're in murky water, you can't see, you can't make this now. So he says fasting is an opportunity for you to sort of get out of the murky water. Get out of there and be what he says, إلى أوج العالم الروحانية or عالم الأرواح, for you to come to the height of, so from the murkiness of the water to the heights of spiritual enlightenment. That's basically what fasting provides for us. So may Allah SWT provide the tawfiq. And then I came across an interesting thing which which we say, the Prophet ﷺ says, "As-siyamu junnatun." It's a shield. So then, there is shield from what? So you know that when the muta'alliq of something is not mentioned, and then it basically yufidul umum, because whatever you can think of, fasting is a shield. So the Prophet ﷺ doesn't mention to you a shield from what. So you can basically, it's basically the Prophet ﷺ is giving you all that scope to understand that, look, there's maybe too much things to mention. So what is it from? It's a means of protecting you from the fire of hell. It's a means, what do the other scholars say? It's a means of protecting you from sin. But then also, very importantly, it is a means, and this is the way I want to point out, a highlight. It is a means of protecting you min al-ilal, from ailments, wal adwa'i, and sicknesses, that comes as a result of you being excessive in terms of fulfilling your desires. So normally scholars, like they say, fasting is not for for health benefits, But in light of this particular hadith, when you look at it, al-siyamu junnatun, and the muta'alliq is not mentioned, it means that the Prophet ﷺ it's a shield from whatever it can possibly be a shield from. And it's naturally, that people, my father rahmatullah alayhi, that, but when in Ramadan, then they used to feel so much better than what they felt otherwise. Why? Because you just the regime of fasting, even if you don't change your diet, and it's healthy to change your diet, but the fact that you're staying away from such food, and there's no excessiveness, because you can only do so much at night, Allah protect. Imam Ghazali Rahman does say that you can maybe cause more harm than what if you excessively eat, but the fact that you're staying away from food so much, it's there's a great benefit. May Allah grant us the tawfiq, inshallah, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's other faida that I read, which I would like to mention in the masjid tonight, and that is that because we will go past this, and tomorrow we have another ayah to do with. You see, fasting has always been a preoccupation of the hukama, Hamza will know better, and the falasafa from before. You see, the hukama, which means, what does hakim mean? The wise people, the wise, the wise elders, let's call them the wise elders. We're talking about civilizational and generational, for hundreds of years. Greek philosophers, Greek wise men, all of them. The human being has always been preoccupied with his holistic well-being. The well-being of his body, the well-being of his soul, the well-being of his intellect. He's always been preoccupied with that. And therefore we find, to maintain that well-being, all wise men and all philosophers have always prescribed fasting. Now fasting means imsak, but there's different forms of it, man. There's different forms of it. So the unique thing which they talk about here, and there's a kitab called Hayakilun Nur, the frames of light, and you want to be in that particular frame. That is by As-Sahrawardi. Hayakilun Nur, he has a kitab. But before that, Ibn Ashur mentions, he talks about this particular thing. So what happens is, when you have your body is the carrier of your soul. Without the body, your soul can't subsist within this worldly realm. It needs a carrier, right? Now what happens is that carrier needs to subsist on food. So why does it need to subsist on food? Because when you feed it, then the carrier, which is your body, it uses that energy it derives from the food for its different functionalities. So then, in the functionalities, the power is used up and it has to be replenished, right? That's how it works. But now what happens is, if you eat in order to function, but now you must replenish it. But if you replenish it and you go overboard, in other words, you go beyond the 1/3 or the 2/3, and now you over replenish it, that food, that energy, where does it go to now? It starts feeding your animalistic self. So in other words, you have almost like an excess now of what's name, and where's that power going to go? It's not just going to dissipate, it's going to go now into, that's when you clap somebody when you're supposed to clap somebody. What power? It's like a unique way of thinking about how the hukama before thought about it. So yes, you need food and you need to you just enjoy it also, but the thing is when there's excessiveness. So they say it's like unique that every like ideology in every civilization and all of that, they prescribe fasting in some form or the other. Some was like, but obviously our way of fasting is what is considered the optimum way of fasting, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed it for us, and that's the optimum way to get the optimum results in terms of health and everything else. So I thought this was important because it gives you context to your fasting, and I think for us, we're very material. So, but to even start from the optimum material, physical position, for me to, like they say, for example, and you guys quoted to me before, that the human being functions optimally on more food or less food? Less food. I mean, if you look at the people of the old, the soldiers particularly, they were kept on a type of ration where it provided them the optimum strength, But you could make out that he had a ration, man, and the ration was just enough to keep him at optimum strength. Because if he went beyond that, then the power would now is basically coming down. So human beings function optimally on, let's call it in our terms, for a harsh term, semi-starvation. It's not the right term, right? But it's not. You don't function optimally on eating the whole time and stuffing yourselves. If you stuff yourself the whole time, it's going to result in the worst version of yourself, as opposed to the optimum version of yourself. So it's important for these frame of minds. And if we can't, spiritual excellence, that's what we want. But at least we can start from being optimum physical beings. And Allah SWT knows best. Fadal, we're going to read now from you. We're going to continue. You guys can go if you want to, because we said we're going to just listen.